Indeed, and I am the chairperson for the DVOC, and I am the point person for Parks and Rec, so it's a collaboration with myself.
You are a walking collaboration.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Billy. I'm in the woods, but the woods in the city. I'm in Wissahickon Park.
What you looking
Part
at?
of Philadelphia's extensive park system.
So for those who are listening to this, what we're doing on this little call is we're about to post, or you're listening to an episode of Wildlife Bling, of like little wildlife observations or moments with some explanation. And Tony and I have both been crazy busy lately. Tony just moved. I just got married. So we've had trouble like getting together to sit down and do a proper episode.
I'm moved. I'm moving. I'm in between houses and I'm in between work sites. Oh, tomorrow you should come to the open house. I forgot to tell you. From 12 to 3, officially announcing that Philadelphia Parks and Recreation will now be staffing Cows Creek Environmental Center with me at the helm.
That is so awesome. So basically, Tony just got promoted to run an environmental center in West Philly, which is so awesome. It's a place that Tony and I have long been involved with in a previous organizational version. And so, like, we're very optimistic that with the city running it and with Tony running it,
yeah,
that it's going to achieve its full potential as just a really awesome environmental center for adults and kids from just really urban neighborhoods right in West Philadelphia. It's awesome.
Yes. Yeah, it's great. Where I work now is phenomenal, but it's a little remote and for walking distance for most people. And Pennypack is a little bit easier to walk to, but not quite. This one is a walking distance of 100,000 people at least.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a million.
What I wanted to ask you about, but more linked to the woods, tell me about this red squirrel you saw.
But I'm actually here with Trish, who actually spotted it and brought my attention to it. But yeah, there was a red squirrel at our feeder, and red squirrels are, they're pine specialists. So while there's some nice stands of pine and hemlock in this park, there's a few ornamental spruces and some cryptomerias and some other conifers nearby the center, hemlock here too, but not the big stands that are in the park. So I hadn't actually seen one in the park at all yet, even though I tried a few times. And this one comes right to our feeder, and that was really cool. I mean, if you live in a city in their core range with lots of pines, it's probably not unusual to you, but for me, to see one in the city was pretty awesome.
It's the kind of thing where, like, a person here, a person there says, hey, you know what? I think I saw a red squirrel in the Wissahickon. And, like, I went out a couple times into the big stands of white pine trees in the Wissahickon and didn't see any. So it's awesome that one just kind of shows up at your feeder.
Yeah.
Give a description of what a red squirrel looks like in comparison to the ubiquitous gray squirrel.
So they're smaller, I think more compact. They have big, and they are red, like a roofsy brown, but pretty red color. And they have I'm not sure if it's the eyelids, exactly the actual anatomy involved, but they do have significant white around the eye, much more distinctive than the ring around the gray squirrel's eye. Like, it's very distinctive white around their eye.
Yeah, when I've seen them, I kind of think of them as like a little miniature elf squirrel, compared to the squirrels. And then the other thing I want to ask about is how did it go with the walk with Christian on the Parkway?
So that was great. So we did a walk with Christian from the Art Museum in Philly down to City Hall. And Philly has an avenue modeled after Paris, with lined with museums, or at least they tried to line up with museums. There's a few apartment complexes and big skyscrapers instead of just museums, but it's still really nice, beautiful boulevard, fountains on either side, and it goes directly from City Hall all the way to Art Museum, and those are both spectacular buildings. Like, Art Museum is about as spectacular as art museums get, and our City Hall is actually the biggest City Hall in the world, the biggest masonry building in the world, and it's just a spectacular building. And right in trees lining the boulevard right from the Art Museum is a active red-tailed nest, and there was 2 young in the nest, and adults were feeding it and flying around. We saw both of those on the hunting along the boulevard well, I guess the Parkway they call it, but it's modeled after the Boulevard in Paris. And then we get to City Hall, and outside of La Colombe, which is the best spot to see it, we saw 2 juveniles and an adult came in with a prey item, and which was a pigeon. So that was really awesome.
Wait, you might have clipped out there, but the ones you saw from La Colombe were the peregrines?
Yeah, the peregrine falcons, yes.
And you're sitting in a coffee shop called, in French, the Pigeon, right?
Yeah,
and
essentially, yeah.
Watching peregrine falcons eat pigeons. I think it's awesome. And so when we talk about, the Wissahickon, where Tony's been working, and then in Cobbs Creek, those are 2 creek corridors where you could say, hey, this is like forest and meadows and stuff, and a stream in the middle, or a creek in the middle. But from that extreme, within the city, from that extreme where you saw the red squirrel, to the other end of the extreme where you're in the most urban, the most built up part of Philadelphia with museums, skyscrapers, city halls, everything. Great range of urban wildlife experience.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous.
So, and the Christian that we're talking about is Christian Hunold, who's our frequent guest host and political scientist from Drexel University, who studies sort of urban ecology, urban wildlife, and human interactions, and is an avid wildlife photographer, and is especially an avid photographer, observer, and has actually written about this academically, about the hawk population in Center City and the people who avidly watch them and keep an eye on them. And was the walk with, was it a Bird Philly thing?
Yes, it was, indeed.
So the walk was in association with Bird Philly, which is it still a partnership of the Delaware Valley Ornithological Club and Philadelphia Parks and Recreation?
Indeed, and I am the chairperson for the DVOC, and I am the point person for Parks and Rec, so it's a collaboration with myself.
You are a walking collaboration. So with that, everybody please lean back and listen to some more observations from that I've recorded. As usual, you can write us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com or tweet at us at urbwildlifecast. We love your reviews on your podcast listening app of choice and ratings, so please leave those. Please tell your friends about the podcast. And if you've got any little observations in your city that you want to record a quick note about and send to us, we'd love to hear them, and we'd love to find some way to get them into the podcast. If you've listened to this podcast very much, you might have heard me, one of your co-hosts, Billy Brown, talk a little bit about how much I love black rat snakes and about how much I would love to find a black rat snake inside the city of Philadelphia. It's my favorite snake, my favorite place. I'd love to find one in here. I saw one get away from me once in the northwest part of the city. I've had people send me pictures from various parts of the city, and I had myself not found one or seen one until Saturday morning. That morning, Magnolia, my daughter, and I were having breakfast up on the roof, watching some swifts and other common birds in the neighborhood, starlings, sparrows, robins. A couple of crows were doing some acrobatics, flying up in between the twin houses on our block. So it was a nice morning. Came inside and I saw a text from our good buddy and frequent guest host, Mike McGraw, and he was saying he'd just seen a juvenile black rat snake down around the Pier 53 redeveloped pier along the Delaware waterfront in South Philly, where his firm, Applied Ecological Services, had done a lot of work on the redevelopment and the ecological restoration of that pier with a lot of native plantings, and since then some monitoring to see what's going on down there, see how wildlife are taking to it. He was down there looking at breeding birds and had seen the rat snake. To set the scene a little bit, the Pier 53 had been a decaying set of timbers and sort of a pier with some trees on it sticking out into the Delaware River. This is an industrial area or a post-industrial area. It also is not the first place you'd think of for to support a population of relatively large snakes. This is not a huge park. This isn't the Wissahickon. This isn't Cobbs Creek. It isn't like Central Park or anything like that, if you know New York. It is a strip of post-industrial wasteland, a little bit of which has been converted into park space.
Okay.
Where is he though?
He's at the Washington. He's at a pier down in South Philly. So we're in the car, getting ready to go.
Why do you have to record that?
Okay, we are driving across Washington Avenue now, getting closer in the 20s, so 20 blocks to go. All right, we're at 16th. Mike McGraw, who saw it, is holding his position, keeping an eye on the little snake, even though it is starting to rain and it's 64 degrees outside. Apparently he's hiding in the bushes to stay dry. There's a detour on Washington Avenue. This is just the wrong time for this. We don't need detours on Washington Avenue. There's some kind of Italian market block party or festival that's got, oh, now we're behind a trash truck. Oh, come on. Oh, man. Okay, turning back onto Washington. Whew, clear sailing from here, it looks like. A couple minutes until we see the rat snake. Okay, we're getting ready to park across the street, and then we're gonna go out in the rain and see this rat snake. Mike had to grab it because it was starting to flee, so he is still out in the rain for us. So we're gonna see this rat snake in a second. All right, we are hustling through the rain. All right. We're walking closer and closer. How you doing, Magnolia? Okay. Where's Mike? I think I see him right there. This is a true friend. So who wants to hold the umbrella? Magnolia?
You're getting so big, my goodness.
Two hands. Two hands. Okay.
Come under here with you.
And that is a wee little rat snake. I'm gonna trade Mike. I'm gonna give him the mic. Actually, that's kind of funny.
Oh,
here,
nice.
Mike, have a mic. And I'll look at the rat snake.
I think it might have a nestling bird in its tummy.
So this probably ate a baby bird. And this is a, oh man, it's adorable.
Isn't that wonderful?
Looks like a foot long.
It's probably 16 inches.
Yep, and it is a juvenile black rat snake. We'll include pictures in this on the podcast, but
I got photos of it in situ as well. Yeah, so this is like last year's adult, or last year's baby. So this animal's less than a year old.
And so the interesting questions, we have a lot of interesting questions about it. How did it end up here?
Right.
I don't think there are breeding adults on this pier.
I don't think so either.
There are adults not too far from here, and so they conceivably, you could imagine something crawling along the edge, like the ribbon of green we have along the river.
So there's random soil mounds all over around here.
Yeah.
I mean, an adult black rat snake could travel a good distance, especially a female looking for a nest.
Yeah.
So it's conceivable that there's more than this one because there's a clutch that hatched out not terribly far away.
We wouldn't expect a baby to have traveled very far on its own.
Exactly.
But a 4 foot, 5 foot female black rat snake
could travel quite some distance.
Cover some ground.
Right. So they probably did cover some ground and dug a nest somewhere nearby, or laid eggs in a, who knows, the mulch pile. There's a huge mulch pile over here for years. That could have easily been where a clutch was laid.
Yeah.
And this is, one of the ones that managed to disperse into a wild space where it actually has a fighting chance of survival. Okay. And because we restored this, it's looking really good. There's a lot of shrubby
it's a bushy
development.
Area.
Yeah, there's a lot of shrub development now. So there's a noticeable increase in breeding birds. We're going to let it go exactly where we found it. So I'm walking along here and I see that this shrub is flowering. So I leaned over to take
What kind of shrub is it?
I got to key it out. I forget, which is shame on me. That's Iva fructescens. I know that. That's Viburnum dentatum or Viburnum lentago.
Hold on to me.
This is a shrub that's native to the freshwater tidal marsh ecosystem in southeastern PA.
Okay.
So that's why we planted it.
And this flowering. This looks quite pretty. Did you get some pictures of it?
It's these umbels. I didn't even get the picture of that because I leaned like this.
And hey, look at that. There's a snake.
See these deformed leaves?
Yeah, it was just back in there.
So its tail was wrapped around here, and its body was draped that way in an ambush position.
Oh.
I mean, maybe this is where it got this meal from.
All right, so we're watching it. Is it descending?
Yeah, it's descending.
I want to see.
Well, then stand where Mike's standing.
Come over here.
And peek in there.
So if you look right here, you can see the tip of the tail. You gotta stand like all the way in here. Right. There's the tail.
All right, we're watching. You can see it sort of descending slowly.
Yeah.
And atmosphere here, I'm holding a umbrella over us as we get rained on, looking at this little rat snake climb down a bush.
Overlooking high tide in the Delaware River.
And the Delaware River as, what kind of swallows are these?
You got actually 3 species. There's mostly barn swallows. There's also tree swallows and northern ruffling swallows.
Yeah, it's in my pocket. Go on. So, I'm sorry, barn swallows, rough-winged swallows, and...
Northern roughwing. Oh, I already said that. Northern roughwing, tree swallow, and barn swallow.
All right, hold that for a second.
Sure, all of which are breeding on the pier too, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah, the tree swallows are breeding out on those abandoned posts.
Nice.
The northern roughwing swallows are breeding in the edges where there's actual native soil.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's native, but where there's actual soil instead of like
they're burrowing
hardscape.
into the soil, yeah.
Yeah, they do these individual burrows. And the barn swallows are nesting underneath the boardwalk.
Very nice. So. And what did we hear calling over our shoulder a minute ago? Or singing?
It was a black-pole warbler. The tit, 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 tit. Do you hear that?
How long are you going to hang out here in the rain,
It's
dude?
time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's totally time to go. Bye-bye, snake. I'm actually glad that it rained because then it like kept people from wondering what I was doing. I was like hiding in the shrubs over there with my binoculars. One firefighter walked past. I scared the crap out of him. I felt bad.
Quick postscript. We're in Dunkin' Donuts. We're gonna get Mike a coffee and a donut as a thank you for spotting the snake.
Who are you talking to?
Future people. And it's pouring outside. The sky's really opened up, so we got there just in time.
I need to jump wrong side of my shoe.
If you want to hear us talk more about the Pier 53 project with Mike McGraw, you can listen to our October 30th, 2015 episode about the Pier 53 skinks. Hey, podcast listeners. Here is another story of urban snake discovery, in this case with something called a short-headed garter snake. Now, garter snakes you might be familiar with. These are striped, medium to small-sized snakes that you find throughout eastern North America and through a lot of western North America, too. There's actually more species out west than there are out east. But there's this one kind of garter snake that lives in Pennsylvania and a little bit in neighboring New York. It's called a short-headed garter snake, and they hail from unglaciated portions of the Allegheny Plateau. So this is in northern Pennsylvania, sort of from like the middle of the state over a little bit to the west, still in sort of the northern third of the state. Even though it's called a plateau, it's very much incised and eroded by rivers, and so in practice it's like a bunch of mountains. And these snakes, although that's where they're from, they also turn up in other cities that are away from the unglaciated portions of the Allegheny Plateau. So there's records of them in Pittsburgh, PA, which is like 100 miles from their native range, which is really far if you're an 18-inch little snake. There are also records of them in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is on Lake Erie and is another 100 miles in another direction. And so a leading hypothesis for how they ended up so far outside their native range is that they piggybacked on timber shipments, on other kinds of natural resource commodity shipments back when the cities that they're now in were bigger industrial centers. Erie is a sort of declining port city on Lake Erie. Pittsburgh has a long history as a major industrial town, and so it totally makes sense that little snakes might have stowed away in shipments of timber or something like that down to yards in Erie, down to yards in Pittsburgh and whatnot, and gotten established. It's this neat kind of urban nature story where you've got animals that have followed really trade routes, economic activity. If you're a fan of William Cronin and Nature's Metropolis about Chicago and sort of looking at how you can overlay natural resource flows with capital flows and other things like that. Like, here's a case where we can overlay probably capital flows and natural resource flows with flows of wildlife. In April of 2016, we did an episode Arthropods Through the Ages, in which we interviewed Alison Bain, an environmental archaeologist who studies the remains of insects in historical sites and sort of looks at what those can tell us about how people lived in those places by what kind of bugs were living with them. And she talked about how, for example, you can see European bugs in, let's say, native villages ahead of European settlement, sort of showing that trade goods from Europe made it to those places that really hadn't been reached by European people yet. And so sort of looking at animals tracing trade routes. And so here we have another example, but this time with a snake, and more recent trade routes from natural resource extraction centers to places where those natural resources were processed or shipped. And they're also just cute little snakes. They're one of my favorites, and the whole species group, I love them. So they're closely related to a snake called the plains garter snake, which occurs, as the name implies, out in the Great Plains in North America, which I caught in Minneapolis recently. They're also related to a snake called Butler's garter snake, which is from the sort of more central Great Lakes, I guess. I caught some about a year ago on a trip to Detroit. So this is a really neat little group of snakes that I've had a lot of fun catching in urban sites all throughout the East and Upper Midwest now.
I am standing along a railroad track in Pittsburgh, PA, and holding a squirmy little male short-headed garter snake. It's like some metalworking warehouses, some railroad tracks. A weedy margin of a railroad track embankment, I'll say that much. It's kind of a cloudy day, the 60s. Flipped a baby decay snake a minute ago. I was here a few years ago, didn't find much, but this is a short-headed garter snake. It's a sweet little snake. So it is a sort of muted colors, kind of different shades of tan and chestnut, but a smart-looking snake. Sort of the black dashes that are the margin of the lateral stripe on the top kind of look like stitching. So it has this kind of like fabric look to it, with this delicate little head and pretty black eyes. I just love this snake. I am in town on a business trip, basically. Did my presentation in my suit, and then changed into my crappy herping clothes in my car in a parking garage. Drove to the spot and started flipping. I gotta try one more historic short-head garter snake spot in Pittsburgh, and it's a little more residential, but still a big vacant area. I wonder what this property was before it is what it is now. But I picked up like an old shirt, and there was one decay snake, one brown snake, in shed underneath it. So blue eyes, getting ready to shed its skin. And I thought, okay, that's a snaky spot. And then I tried to block a concrete because I was like, hey, it's a snaky spot. And there were like 4 or 5 short-headed garter snakes underneath it. And they are known to be gregarious. Like you find one, you find a bunch. But still, that was amazing. Hell of a trip.
This next part doesn't need much introduction. So here is some exciting urban wildlife action that we caught at lunch.
All right, I'm sitting here with Dave Hewitt, and there goes the hawk with the squirrel in its talons. That was badass.
Amazing.
All right, so we are in Washington Square Park, just having lunch and chilling on a bench next to the fountain at around 1:30
in the afternoon.
What do you say? It's like in the mid-60s and kind of cloudy.
Yep. All
and
the trees are leafed out.
Squirrels were playing around and kind of creeping around looking for crumbs like they do. And what we noticed was a hawk like comes down and basically lands next to a guy in a business suit reading something on his lap on a bench, sort of like a third of the way around the fountain from us. And then we realized that it was pursuing a squirrel that was darting around some small bushes behind the guy. Then the hawk landed and it seems like it nabbed the squirrel and then flew away. Mm-hmm.
And it was so quiet. The people that were sitting in front of it didn't notice it.
Yeah, the guy noticed only because there's a hawk at his shoulder.
Yeah. The wind probably. It was incredibly silent. And the people that were sitting to the side didn't notice until they heard the leaves shaking around.
So this is not the first time I've seen hawk squirrel predation in this park. One time I was doing squirrel fishing, and a guy stopped and asked me about it because he thought I was setting the squirrels up for death, and then pointed out a hawk under a bush eating a squirrel while I was sitting there. I was like, oh, hey, look at that.
As always, if you like the podcast, rate us on your podcasting app of choice. Please leave a comment. Please feel free to tweet at us at UrbWildlifeCast. Send us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Hit us up on Facebook. We want to hear your ideas for the podcast. And even if you have little adventures like this, maybe record them and we can include them also on the podcast.